Hi, good morning or good afternoon, and welcome to our Vocus Labs user optimization webinar. It's great to have everybody on board today. Just a few notes from my side. This webinar is recorded, and we will provide the recording as well as the slides post the event. I would like to ask everyone, considering that you are on mute, if you do have any questions, please pop them in the questions bar at the bottom on the right hand side. You can write your questions in there, and we will have a specific session at the end of the webinar to deal with questions. I'm sure there may be some from the audience out there. Yeah, great to get you going this morning. Thank you to everybody for joining us, and we try to make this as interactive as possible. Let me move to the next slide here quickly. Just an update, myself, I'm Rogan Morrison. I'm a delivery director and sales director at Vocus Labs. And together with me, I have Andreas Nabs from Stevus, who's a sales director.
Good morning.
Good morning, Andreas. Great to have you on board. And Andreas will be taking some specific sections in this presentation. We are running a number of GRC webinar series. This is part 2, and we have some additional slides at the end here which indicate which other webinars we will be running. But we always want to get your feedback from clients out there and customers working in this specific area in terms of what is most interesting to you, what you would like to see us focus on, and how we can help you gain a better understanding in these specific topics around governance, risk and compliance, users, authorizations, etc. So that's the whole purpose of this, is to share information and to gain insights as to how best to meet the requirements that businesses have in terms of their running and making it run as efficiently as possible. Right, just some overview from our agenda. We're going to just look at some company information. We always try and deal with some key questions from our last webinar. For those of you that had questions, for people who want to add questions, you can always see what the answers then are. We'll look at some enterprise challenges with regards to SAP users. The principle of this webinar is about user management and the optimization of users. So we're going to look at it from some different angles in terms of the context of what do we have to manage in terms of SAP users and how do we optimize them. Joiners, movers, leavers processes. These are some of the most commonly challenging processes in most businesses, and an approach to user optimization, and then some questions. Good, just a bit of a history about Vocus Labs as an organization. Vocus Labs is part of a bigger group called Vocus, which started in the 1980s and so far has been running for over 41 years now. We have 2 different products on the market, SAMQ, which we can see was launched in 2010, and our SETQ product in 2018. And the combination of these helps us to provide both tooling, solutions, and services in terms of advisory for all areas related to SAP licenses, authorizations, and compliance. And we're based all around the world and have various different regions. I actually work out of the Cape Town office, and so we are based all over in that context. As you can see here, we have a number of different regions. I've covered this through in some of our areas of clientele in terms of different industries indicated below there. So I hope that gives you a good indication of what we kind of do from a assessment of and helping of customers from a global perspective. Okay, our 2 main products, SETQ and SAMQ. SETQ is specifically focused on our identity and authorization management, critical to manage users in your SAP environment, but not only the users that use SAP applications, but also third-party applications, cloud applications, etc., and the integration of those applications to other type functionalities such as Active Directory, etc. And this is really what our focus is on today, is the identity element of user management. But SETQ does so much more than that. It also helps you with your role concept and authorization concept, the redesign of that. We touched on that in our last webinar about optimizing roles. We also do a lot of important web-based request and approval workflows to make the processes that you have, especially when we speak about joiners, movers, and leavers. That process you want to optimize and make as smooth as possible, as well as making sure that your users comply to the relevant regulation, the rule sets that you have from an organizational perspective, and any remediation that needs to take place is critical to build into your user management process. Again, we spoke about role optimization, the expansion of roles, the reduction of roles, and these are all tied into your users and how they fit together in executing the relevant transaction sets and the processes that you run within your organization. Compliance and the documentation of that is critical. Password management is one area we'll speak about a little bit in more detail in this webinar. And then on the right-hand side, we have your SAMQ license management. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about the license management side of things, except to say that one of the most important elements of tying users to licenses is through the authorizations management context. And when we look at this in principle, most organizations have a solution or potentially use a solution set, but it never ties in the license management. And so it's critical that when you make changes in the joiners, movers, and leavers process, that you consider the potential impact on a license management perspective. And that's really where we differentiate our services and our solutions, in that we have built a bridge between SAMQ and SETQ that ensures that when you make changes from an authorization management perspective on an individual's user identity, that those changes are reflected or notified against the relevant license type that that individual has been assigned. Now, in the SAMQ side, we base our license usage on, or license management on usage. So we analyze what individuals are actually using in SAP as compared to just allocation. So here's a key element that creates an immediate amount of optimization in user management between tying these two together. And that's really critical, because often business people are working in their business on a daily basis. Their end users, it's a finance end user and a general accountant, requires some additional transactions, and therefore they automatically allocate these with relevant security and authorization checks, but they don't necessarily recognize that there's a new implication on the license type and the usage that they're now giving to this individual. And this can push them into a higher license type, which costs more money. It may be that you don't have the inventory for this, so now you need to go and reassess your inventory and you get audited. It creates a lot of different challenges in the organization. So that bridge is so critical, and it really makes it much easier. Right, underneath that we have our advisory services, and here we help a lot of customers and companies engage specifically to obtain the best results from the solution sets that we have. We help them with concepts in terms of authorization, concept redesigns, compliance reporting, access on security. We have a security compliance check that helps organizations understand exactly where they are, what their users are doing in the system, in the SAP system and environment that could create serious security risks. And again, then your S/4HANA role migration on the left-hand side, all related to authorizations management. On the right-hand side, we have a whole lot of advisory elements related to the SAP license management, and I won't deal with those. We have separate webinars that cover that whole aspect in a lot more detail. So I don't know, Andreas, do you want to add anything to this at this point in time?
No, this was pretty comprehensive. Thank you.
Okay, good. Just in terms of value proposition, you can see here on the slide, really, our whole objective from a Vocus Labs perspective is to try and help clients obtain the best business results in management of their SAP security and authorizations. So we have around this context here a set of specific services that we help organizations with: compliance checks, role optimizations, authorization pre-go lives for S/4HANA, CUA replacement, etc. And really the background to us as being able to do this is that we have a specific solution set that helps you with this. We engage across many different industries. We see lots of the common challenges that industries and companies face, and so we're able to adapt our services to meet those challenges. We have a significant amount of experience in managing implementations of this nature, and we have a very good implementation methodology, which is very structured by a number of phases. I've covered some of those phases before to help organizations understand this. We've got some pre-built roles and audit checks that already come standard out of the box based on very strict rule sets, etc. And you can amend those, bridge those with your specific client requirement rule sets, etc. And then we know how our auditors work, and we help clients interact with the solution to get the best out of it. Okay, a few quick questions from our last webinar. We shared what is the logic behind the reduction manager. So we really want to optimize roles that are conflict-free and cost-effective. To what compliance standards do we subscribe to from a best practice rule perspective? We really have this at the highest level at DSAG. And again, as I say, it's a very comprehensive and extensive rule set, and you can customize this, of course. So we've had customers who are asking us, can we import our existing rule set? Absolutely, you can, and we can tweak it, etc. Is role reduction always tied up with cost savings? Absolutely. Why? Because two things: efficiency and effectiveness leads to cost savings. And user management, a bit of a concern in case of change of roles. Yes, it's vital. We want to make it effective and efficient. And if you manage your users as effectively, it becomes simple, smart, and really accurate in terms of what you do. So just some context around the questions there.
Rogan, one thing regarding the reduction manager, maybe one question we haven't seen here in the slide, which was coming up last time, is what can the reduction manager do? And just to mention it, the new reduction manager in the new release can also shrink roles. And because the standard one was only shrinking the assignment of roles to users, and the new one can shrink roles and make them smaller. So pretty interesting, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andreas. And I think, if you want any information regarding how this works and want to see a potential demonstration of shrinking the roles, please reach out to us. Our details are available on the slide decks and in the information provided. Great. A little challenge around enterprises. From an enterprise architecture background, managing SAP users and the integration across an entire enterprise is pretty challenging. And why? First of all, because organizations have strategies, they have goals that are linked to those strategies. And when I think about this from an architecture perspective, the first thing I ask is, do we have a strategy related to how we manage our users? What are our goals related to this? So always you can tie these things together from an architectural perspective. And do we link a set of processes to those strategies and goals? In this case, we're talking about the movers process, the joiners process, and the leavers. Sorry, joiners, movers, leavers. I always want to put the movers first, but it's probably the more common of the three processes because people are moving around in the organization. So we have definitive processes that are designed related to SAP users. We often find in organizations when we arrive that there are specific diagrams, and we'll show you some examples of certain processes that are taking place, especially in the HR space, but they can be IT design processes that define how you go about creating a joiner, a mover, and a leaver. We often have documentation, so we need to link to the individual and the process of this from a user perspective, the relevant documentation that has been provided to define their specific user rights. In other words, we need to get their attributes, their names, details, all of that. And most of that normally comes from an HR perspective. We have organizations to think about in this context. We need to know what their workplace is, where are they working, in which area of the business, the line of business. This organizational structure is linked to their job, of course. And here we have the employee, the user itself. So now we've got somebody who's been employed in the organization. We're linking their job to this process, and we're linking the employee to the role and the role to the process as well. So we're starting to build a construct in this context around how do we manage users at a very high level and the context of how they fit together in the organization. And what's really important through all the implementations that I've been involved in an SAP perspective is if you understand the business process as well, it helps to, first of all, empower the user optimization process, and you understand what role they need, what jobs they're going to fulfill, how they fit into the overall strategy of the organization, where they're actually performing their task, and then we link them to performance indicators. In other words, how they're going to perform. That links to the various different goals and jobs, and that again comes back to the employee itself. So they will review the charts and they will see various different information in that. As we mentioned earlier, users create risk. They do things that they shouldn't do, so we need to manage this risk, and we need to have a compliance check in terms of how much risk they are adding. This again relates to the processes that they're performing. We have to understand what their requirements are. So again, coming back to our process, we need to understand what controls to put in place, linked to those risks, linked to the process. And then we start adding our IT systems. So if you had no IT application, before IT came in, you would be running this entire top section of the system really on paper. And now we add an application layer. In this case, it can be an SAP application layer, and we start linking various different networks and servers and databases and infrastructure to that, and we link that back to your process. And in essence, we then build out and we say, okay, we have some external agents and some work products, and these also link to our processes that the employees are performing. And we need to understand all of this because we need to link their user accounts to these processes. And what happens in business is that you find we have multiple employees and jobs and many layers in the application layer, many different types of requirements, for example, many different controls. I haven't put them all in, but you can see that from an enterprise engagement perspective, this becomes pretty complex. And this is really why we want to try and keep our user, the whole user optimization and the way in which we manage things as simple as possible, because of all these different interactions that users are able to perform across the business. And we have to keep this managed on an ongoing basis. It just doesn't happen that the business stays static all the time. So we really want to manage this on an ongoing basis. So first of all, when we look at optimization of users, the first thing we need to consider in most cases is information security. So we can really say that user management, like the normal top one, and I think about different industries, things like places like banking industries, financial industries, very highly regulated industries, oil and gas, defense departments, etc. The information security is pivotal. Why? Because within SAP specifically, you contain all of the things related to your IP security, the business processes, your intellectual, as I said, intellectual property and the security of that. All your financial results are all contained in SAP. So information security is critical to this. So we need to have very accurate systems that manage password management, two-step verifications, and on top of this, we need to consider all the different system connections. So SAP is not just connected to internal SAP connections, but all the external system connections to web portals, to all of these different elements that form your application layer. And so we need to consider these things when it comes to making sure we have optimized user management. Secondly, we need to have reliance on a digital and accurate digital identity. So every user has, and I use this context almost in a different way to what the normal terminology is, a digital twin. So you have an individual who is a person such as myself, Rogan Morrison, and in essence, I have a digital twin in the system. Okay, this is all the attributes of me, but who are captured in a digital context. I know we often speak about digital twins being the processes or the context around running processes from a digital twin perspective, two systems digitally creating twins of each other. But in this context, I often think about it as having a digital identity in different systems. And I need to be reliant on having a very accurate digital identity in the different systems. Why? Because we want to ensure that one, the departments control the relevant digital identity, and we move that control away from IT in some context. Why? Because the departments know the individuals better than IT. So it's important to pass that control over to a departmental level. 2, we need to ensure that our HR systems, where we are connecting to them, are really accurate and kept up to date, especially in the context that we don't want to duplicate information. We want to rely on a specific set of information that is provided from our HR system. And then if we're engaging with customers and vendors and people who are integrating into our SAP application, we need to have the accuracy of their information. We don't want to have multiple different vendors, multiple different customers of the same individual multiple different times. It becomes very inefficient to manage that. So the accuracy of the digital identity is very crucial in terms of user management optimization. So breaking this out broader, thinking about not only the individual inside of your organization, but the external person as well, we need to cover that aspect. And then thirdly, a user management and this digital identity I've just spoken about requires digital attributes, okay? And we need to be understanding of what these digital attributes are, what we can capture, what we can't capture, what requires mandatory fields, etc. So we need to understand all the relevance around the digital attributes as well. So what regulations are being applicable to this? And when I come back, that very first slide I showed about strategies, this is where the strategy around regulations and goals and things like that come to pass. Do you have a strategy to manage user management and optimize it? What regulations do you require? These are almost architectural principles related to user management. As I said earlier, we don't want to have data duplication, so we don't want to have multiple sets of the same individual residing in our application landscape, and we have to manage them 2 or 3 or 4 times. And again, coming back right to the beginning, we need to have these digital attributes. They need to be securely stored, because we don't want people getting access to various information, whether it's credit card information, certain healthcare information, etc. So we see a lot of breaches occurring in not just only SAP, but in the IT landscape overall. Many companies have a significant volume of attacks taking place, and so therefore the data security on these elements is critical. Andreas, anything you want to add into that?
No, it's okay.
Okay, good. Before we go on to the next slide, I just want to put a poll out there and just talk about the distribution of how you manage your users. So let me select this and launch this. And really the poll is, let's see if it launches. Okay. No,
It was working.
It
yeah,
was,
you closed
right?
it.
Closed it.
I've seen it and you closed it, and I think with the new go to webinar, it's gone now.
Oh, I apologize for that, people. I apologize. It says to me, do I want to close it? And so apologies for that. I'll run another poll quickly. Let's just run this one here instead. And so before we get into the next thing here,
the same issue.
The same issue happened? No?
Yeah, the same issue happened. It was popping up and then closing. So maybe something is wrong.
Guys, wait a moment. Just let me share it again if it's working.
Okay.
Don't do anything.
Okay, let's see. Can you see the poll on that side, Andreas?
Yeah, no, I see one.
Okay. They're reviewing the poll results, I think, Sebastian.
Oh yeah. Okay, then you need to go to the next one.
Okay, let's just go to the next one here, and let's just launch this one here. Let's see if
it's popping up now. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so take a bit of time. We're just trying to understand again, if you have a process for these different processes, joiners, movers, leavers, what's the perspective that you have in terms of AD, HR, paper-based, other? Okay, so far 45% of the vote is in. Okay, we'll give it another 30 seconds odd. Let some more people add their comments in here. What's interesting to see is the volume of paper-based processes. That's interesting to see. Okay, 5 more seconds and then we'll close out the poll. Okay, let's close out the poll. Let's have a look at the results before we go on to the next slide itself. So can you see the...
Nope.
I can just share this. Let me share.
Yeah, now I see it. Now I see it.
Okay, good. So we have a lot of people who, in terms of the poll itself, have 44% have processes for managing their user authorization through Active Directory. We have 70%, which we expected for HR, and 26% based on paper-based processes. 19% say other. It would be interesting to hear what those others are. I'm sure you could put some comments maybe in the questions box or in the chat box. It would be good to see what those others are. I'd be interested to hear. I think what's important about this is that most organizations have multiple user management systems in the first place. So they're managing user-based their users through Active Directory. They're integrating them with HR. They have some paper-based processes. I think the challenge in this context, especially around paper-based processes, is that it's difficult to maintain them. So as soon as you've got it on paper and you're not maintaining an active business process modeling solution, this becomes very difficult to know whether you're using the most up-to-date process, whether it's an HR process, an Active Directory process, a connective process to a cloud solution, etc. So this is one of the bigger challenges that we find in it. The challenge is that if you're not understanding the process and the way in which the process is working, it becomes very difficult to manage users and their security, etc. So just some context around that. Okay, we will run another poll at the end of the next set of slides, but really the principle about user optimization is specifically related to, in our case, the identity manager, where we really focus on creating a centralized context around maintaining this user across multiple different systems. Okay, and that's really important. So we can have one or several users who do and perform roles and perform their jobs and execute transactions, but we want to maintain them in one place across the entire landscape, not only SAP, but cloud solutions, other non-SAP cloud solutions, etc. And we want to be able to interact with them and capture their information in only one place. Okay, so that again eliminates issues specifically around data. Yeah.
We still see the poll result.
Okay, let me hide this. Do you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so let me just recap a little bit there. User optimization in terms of its principle specifically relates to our identity manager in SetQ, and the whole principle of how we want to optimize users is to create a central place where you maintain and manage the maintenance of your one or several users, okay, and you connect these users from a central area to multiple different systems, be they SAP applications, non-SAP applications, they can be connected to Active Directory, etc. Maybe Andreas, I can ask you to come in here and give some context here.
Yeah, maybe to explain a little bit about, you see the workplace, e.g. purchasing manager in London. The workplace is more or less a kind of a composite role. So where all the single roles and composite roles are mixed together to make it more comprehensive. When you ask for a new role for a new user, for instance, it's really hard to see some cryptic stuff. You don't know which country you have and everything. And if you work in a department, line of business, whatever, and you see it's a workplace called Purchasing Manager London, then it's pretty easy to understand what this role or workplace is doing. And this makes it easy for the people to assign roles or ask for it. And the important here is that we, inside this workplace, we have created it's called function and packages, where we integrate the where and what's. So we have the access to the target systems. We have like the integration of the Active Directory on the right-hand side here. We have whatever HR or BW, stuff like that, and everything is in the workplace. So I'm not sure. Do you talk about web on the next slides, or should I say something about web?
No, I think you can talk a bit about web. I think it's important to talk about web applications. We talk about the joiner, movers, leavers process in the next slide, and some context around those.
No, okay.
So you can go through a bit of web context there if you want.
Okay,
Andreas.
Okay, I can. Yes, of course. Important here is that most of the companies like to have those role assignments out of the IT department going into the departments, and with easy to understand web surface, it's possible to go inside the system. Let's say you are a key user, for instance, and Rogan is the new user which is coming, and you open your web surface or your web GUI, and you see it pretty easy. There's only the Purchasing Manager London and maybe 3 roles or workplaces more, and it's pretty easy to pick one of those. If you have 5,000 roles to look at, you will be pretty much confused and probably select the wrong ones, and the workflow is coming back and telling you, hey, you did something wrong. And if you have the workplace like Purchasing Manager, yeah, it will go through definitely, because there can't be a mistake when you're using the set system.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andreas, for that explanation. Right. When we look at the 3 processes, and these are the real context around optimization, what do we want to achieve? We've got the joiners, movers, and leavers. Really, optimization must lead to cost savings, it must lead to a reduction in audit risk, and it must lead to accuracy in terms of individuals, their data, and their specific attributes that we spoke about earlier. So new users, new employees, I think most of you who are working in this space understand the joiners processes, specifically a new employee, a new partner, a new customer, a new role, an existing role could also be created. And again, as I spoke about earlier, when you consider a joiner, most organizations have to think about, do they need a new license? Is it an existing license? Is it a change to the license, etc.? These are some of the context that you need to think about when we look at joiners. Movers, do they change the role? Do they change the user license up or down? Do they stay the same? What is the context in that change? How do we make that change as efficient as possible? And then leavers, thinking about closing user accounts, deactivating users. We do a lot of work with customers who forget to deactivate their users. So we see an inactive user account log from a license perspective. And then this gets audited and they get counted in terms of the license audit, and then end up having to true up on their license account. So the combination of integrating your user management aspect to your license management aspect is critical from a leavers process. You want to release that license back into the inventory and make it available should you need it, or you want to go into a process where you actually then terminate certain licenses where they're not necessary. Very, very critical in that perspective. So let's just have a look at some of these processes in more detail. If I can get the screen to move down one. Example of a joiners process, here on the left-hand side, what we're showing here is some of the examples from an HR perspective of how joiners are joined through HR. So again, in this context here, we have a solution to link in the HR process, okay, from an org management perspective, reacting to measures, what takes place in org management from a hiring process. So in the context on the left-hand side, we send out a pool for talent, we advertise a specific post, and it goes through an HR process. You know, search the pool, identify the possible candidates, receive applications. We're starting an entire process from an SAP perspective here. This is taking place from a portal perspective. Now you need to have two different types of users here. People who are actively using the SAP HR system to manage this process, but we're thinking about a joiner who's going to actually join the company, etc. They apply. We get them once they've actually been selected. They've gone through their interview process. We then start here in HR systems, in the administration here, in the info types 1050, creating the job, creating the new position. All of that context that I spoke about from an organizational perspective needs to take place. And what's important is to align the master data and the position from an org management perspective into our identity manager, so that you can then assign the relevant authorizations to that individual as accurately as possible. So again, we want to eliminate duplication of data. We want to make sure that your accuracy is there, and that the security of this individual who's now joined your organization is maintained at the highest level. Andreas, any comments on this process? I think we've covered it.
So maybe to the reacting to measures, it's also if you change your name, somebody is married now and the name changes from Rogan to whatever, whatever is changed. So the PPOME process is integrated here in the SAP Org Management and Identity Manager when you use the HR connector.
Good. Okay, when we think about movers, I've just taken another example here about the Active Directory process and things like that. Again, we can have different transfers of individuals in the actual system. Again, it can come out of an HR process, but important here is that we are able to integrate authorizations and master data to your MS Active Directory, again, maintaining a centralized place to manage the authorization concept. And the user concept is in one single place. You don't have to maintain the data in duplicate places. And I think that's really the critical point around optimizing your SAP users, ensuring that whether you run it through HR, whether you run it through Active Directory, or a combination of both, that everything is contained in a central identity manager and it's easy to manage in that context. Okay, and then levers, let's talk about things related to the cloud. And I think in this context, especially about people who are customers, who are vendors, who are transient somewhere in nature. Employees tend to be more a long time. You may have people who are contractors in your environment. And in this case, I've taken a cloud-based process and said, okay, in this context, we have web services, we have cloud platforms, we have third-party cloud platforms, we even may have third-party on-premise systems that engage with various customers and vendors or contractors, etc., that provide a service to your organization. And here they need to have access into your SA ERP to book either, for example, a quality notification, or to create a service order, or to create sales orders or purchase orders in your organization. They're buying things from you from a sales order perspective. And here you want to interact with them. But in some cases, those people change and they leave your organization, they leave the context, they're one-off people, and you want to move them. Again, we can manage that process through a single identity manager and integrate them through a cloud connector. So moving your applications into a cloud-based solution is very easy and able to be covered through a centralized identity management process. Just in terms of the third-party on-premise solutions, yes, we would require some additional configuration and some additional work, but it is possible to connect these into the identity manager in ZQ and be able to optimize the users in one place. Andreas, any comments on the cloud context?
Yeah, maybe interesting. We have seen the workplace before, and inside this workplace, for instance, we have, let's say, HR manager. He's the HR. The workplace is called HR manager, and you assign the role or the workplace to Rogan HR manager. Then the cloud connector will go to SuccessFactors, for instance, and say, okay, Rogan is the HR manager, and will assign or provision the roles inside SuccessFactors. And regarding the third-party on-premise systems, it's always dependent on the system. They need to have a good API with the post-get functionality, and then we can integrate it normally.
Good, thank you, Andreas. Okay, we're going to launch one more poll here, and let's talk about cloud. I'm going to launch this poll. Let me just confirm if you see that. It should be distributing now. Okay. Okay, we're over 50%. Let's give a little bit of time to see if there's any more votes in on this. Other than that, we will then close out and have a look at the poll response. Okay, let's, we're with 56% in. I think we can close the poll at this point. We've had over a bit of a minute and a half almost for people to answer the poll itself. And let's have a look now. You should be able to, let me share the poll with everyone. So you should be able to see the results. So quite a number of people, 20% on this webinar have a user management solution that covers their cloud-based solutions, which is good to see. A significant portion say no. And maybe that's a consideration in terms of the context of your SAP landscape. Your landscape may not have, at this point in time, cloud applications, so therefore it's not necessary. 20% say would like more information. Yes, certainly we can provide specific information around cloud and how we integrate with cloud and show you some demos specifically on cloud, because it is definitely a way that we're seeing SAP are moving. Many organizations have considered whether they should move to, HANA Enterprise Cloud or onto a cloud-based solution provider such as Azure or Google or Amazon, etc. And then all the new and latest SAP applications we spoke about, SuccessFactors, SAP Analytics Cloud, the replacement for business objects, etc., are all cloud-based solutions. And therefore, it does definitely create a requirement in the marketplace to be able to connect your users to cloud-based applications through a web service and through different cloud, to different cloud solutions, both SAP and non-SAP cloud solutions. So I'm thinking of some of the other organizations using Coupa for purchasing, etc. And they need to manage their users in this context through a cloud-based application and have it as a centralized management. Right, I think that in context comes to the end of our webinar about user management. I just want to wrap it up from a summary perspective there before we take some questions. And maybe there are some questions out there. It's always good to spend some time dealing with some of the questions. But just in summary, I mean, user management we spoke about earlier specifically relates to authorizations in terms of security. We spoke about the digital identity and the digital attributes and how this relates to your SAP landscape, and not only the SAP landscape, but the overall IT landscape, and managing your users from an optimal perspective in a single central place helps you to, first of all, save costs, ensure that you have accuracy because they're all getting managed in one space, not in multiple spaces, and that you can then have the level of security applied in one area to all of your users. So let's see if there are any specific questions related to user management and how we go about it. Let me just check. I don't see any questions there at the moment. Let me double check.
We see the poll.
Oh, let me hide this. That's why. So thanks. Okay. Any questions that individuals have, and we can apply some time to answering those. Okay, if there aren't any questions, and maybe I'll just give it another minute or two, then yeah, we would like to thank everybody for your attendance today. We do have specific opportunities for people to reach out to us, and as you said earlier, you would like more information, please indicate to us that we can get in touch with you, and we can certainly share more information and potentially a detailed demonstration of the SETQ functionality, both on the two areas that we've covered thus far this year, role optimization as well as user optimization, and the combination of these two working together to ensure that you have the maximum value from your SAP application. If there's no other questions, then yes, I'd like to thank you for your time today. Thank you for your attendance, and I wish you a very successful rest of your day. Stay safe, and we'll be in touch and look forward to our next webinar. Just in terms of our next webinars, you'll see them upcoming here on the screen. How to stay in front of SAP licensing, and then we have a second one happening in and around the 9th and 10th of June around SAP GRC access and authorizations beyond 2021. What does the future look like for SAP GRC access and authorizations? We look forward to having you on those webinars as well. Check your time zones for those, and again, thank you very much for your attendance today.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Jürgen.
I'm just going to stop sharing. Hold on.
We're still recording.